Okay, so this video is going to cover the last aspect that we'll be talking about, which is the perfect progressive aspect. So far, we've talked about the present aspect, we've talked about the simple aspect, the progressive aspect, and the perfect aspect. And now what we're going to talk about is a combination of those last two aspects, the perfect progressive aspect. So the meaning of the perfect progressive is a combination of the perfect, which means before or prior, and the progressive, which means changing and incomplete. So it's a combination of all of those meanings together. So the acronym for that would be, triple PCI. So perfect, progressive, prior, changing, and incomplete. We're going to have three forms of this, as we always do with our three tenses. So we have the past form, which is going to be made up of three words. The first word is going to be had, the past tense of have. And then we're going to have been, which is the past participle of the verb be. And then we're going to have the present participle. The present participle just means the ing form of the verb, and we use that also in the progressive. For the present perfect, we're also going to have three words: has or have, depending on what the subject is, been, plus again the present participle. For the future perfect, we're actually going to have about four words, or four groups of words. So we have will or be going to being the first group, have being the second one, been being the third one, and then the present participle being the last one. So let's look here at the past perfect progressive. And here's an example. We had been planning a vacation in Maine, but changed our minds after receiving the brochure on Nova Scotia. So the meaning of this, again, with the past, whenever we have the past tense, it has a meaning of remoteness, meaning that it's distant from where we are right now. It's removed. So it's a past action that was in progress that was interrupted by a more recent past action. Okay, so we talked about in class that the perfect tense always indicates two events. Because the perfect tense always means before, we always need to have, well, before what? So in the past tense, when we're using the past perfect or the past perfect progressive, we always need to mention both of those two events. So in this example, the first event is planning a vacation, right? The second event is changing our minds, right? So those are the two things that happen. Um, the first thing that happened is we had been planning a vacation. And the second thing that happened was that we changed our mind. So the important thing is here with the past perfect progressive is that we're talking about an event that was in progress, meaning that it wasn't finished, right? That it was changing, that it was incomplete, and it was interrupted by another past action. Um, Okay, now that second past action could, as it did in this case, end the first action, but it doesn't have to. But let's look at some more examples here from real life to help you understand this better. So these are sentences about me. So I had been living in Reston for 6 years when I started to work at Nova. Now again, we have two events. The first one is that I had been living, right? And the second one is I started to work. Now, the first event was continuous, was ongoing. So it had started 6 years ago and was continuing for 6 years when it was interrupted by the second event, which was I started to work. Okay? In this case, the second event doesn't end the first one, but it comes in the middle of it. Let's look at another example. I had been teaching in high school for 7 years when I decided to quit. So in this case, we have two events. The first one being had been teaching in high school, and the second one was decided to quit. So the first event had been going on for a long period of time, for 7 years. So it was in progress. Okay, it was changing and incomplete. But when I decided to quit, that comes in and interrupts it. So different from the first example that we have here is that when I decided to quit actually ends the first event. So I want to give another example that's not progressive to show you a difference between these two. So this one, I had been married for 1 year when I had my first child. This is not the progressive. We'll notice that rather than having I had been marrying, we have I have been married. So in this case, this is just the past perfect, not the past perfect progressive. The difference between this one and the previous ones is that it's not describing something ongoing, right? It's describing, well, it is describing something ongoing, I'm sorry, but it's describing a state, a non-action verb. So remember, in general, non-action verbs can't be used in the progressive tense. So moving on to the present perfect progressive. We have here the example, Bert has been going out with Alice. I have been reading that book. So the meaning of the present always has the meaning of immediate factuality, meaning that at this point it's true, that there's a truth continued to right now. Now, one of the things that we said about the perfect tense is that it always has to have two events. Okay? When we are using it in the present, the second event is always right now. The second time is always right now. So in the first example, Bert has been going out with Alice. The first event is him starting to go out with her. But the second event that we're talking about is right now. And in the second one, I have been reading that book. The first event is starting to read that book, and the second event is right now, or maybe event's not the right word, maybe time is better. But the meaning of this is an action or a situation that began in the past and is not yet completed. So when we're using this ing form, we're really indicating that something started in the past, has continued from the past to the present, and is incomplete. It will probably continue into the future. It's going to be continuing into the future. So let's look at some more examples from real life. So I have been living in Reston for 10 years. Okay? The first event that happened is me beginning to live in Reston. And it has continued up until today, which is the second time. And it will probably continue into the future because it's incomplete. I have been teaching at Nova for 4 years. So the first event that happened was the beginning of teaching 4 years ago. And the second event, or the second time, is right now. And this is an event that is incomplete, that will continue into the future. Now here's an example that's not progressive, again, just so you can see the contrast. I have been married for 15 years. Okay? The reason why this one is not in the progressive is because in this case, being married is a non-action. It's a state, so we can't use it in the continuous tense. Okay, so moving on to our last one here, the future progressive. The examples here are, on Christmas Eve, we will have been living in the same house for 20 years. He will have been keeping a journal for 10 years next month. So the meaning of the future progressive, remember the future generally means prediction, right? A prediction about the future. And it can be a stronger or weaker prediction. The stronger with will, the weaker with be going to. But what it means, the future perfect progressive. So as we said before, whenever we're using the perfect, we need to have two events or two times. The first event is going to be the one in the perfect tense, and the second event or time will either be stated as a time or stated as an event. Okay, so what this means is an action or situation that's currently true, that's true right now, and will continue to be true into the future up to a certain time or through a certain time. Okay, so the difference between up to until means that it's going to stop, and through means it's going to continue. So if we look at the first example, the first event that happened was starting to live in the house. That happened in the past, has continued into the present, and will continue into the future up until Christmas Eve. Okay, at Christmas Eve, that's our second time. In the second example, he will have been keeping a journal for 10 years next month. The first thing that happened is the starting to keep the journal, which happened in the past. It's continued up until now, so it's true right now, and it will continue up until next month, which is the second time. Okay? So let's look at some examples from real life. So here, I will have been living in Reston for 14 years when my son graduates from high school. Okay? So the first event that happened is the beginning to live in Reston. Okay? Then we come to right now. This is still true. Right now, I'm living in Reston. And it is going to continue till the second event when my son graduates from high school, which is going to be in 2021, I think. So that's our second event or our second time. There. One thing to keep in mind here is, I mentioned this in class, but in the dependent clause, when my son graduates from high school, the tense of the verb graduates is the present tense, not the future tense. So even though we're talking about the future, we only use the future in the independent clause, not in the dependent clause. Here's another example. I will have been teaching at Nova for 10 years in 2022. Okay? So the first event is starting to teach at Nova, which happened in the past. Right now, in the present, this is true. I'm teaching at Nova. In 2022, as long as they haven't fired me, I will still be teaching there. Okay? So the second time is 2022. Here's another example. I will have been married for 19 years when my son graduates from high school. Well, notice that this one is not in the progressive, again for the same reason why it wasn't in the progressive before. In this case, we're talking about a state. We're not talking about an action. We're talking about a non-action situation or a state. So the getting married, the being married started before, is currently true and will continue to be true, God willing, as long as my wife doesn't leave me, into the future when my son graduates. Let's take a final look here at just these three tenses together, these three tenses with their different aspects. So last week we had been taking ESL 41 for 2 weeks. Okay? So what this means is that we had been taking ESL 41 that began in the past for 2 weeks was a duration, and then last week is the second time. Okay, so we have two events that are happening in the past. Now we have been taking ESL 41 for 3 weeks. So again, this began in the past. That's our first event. The second event, or the second time, is right now. Next week, we will have been taking ESL 41 for 4 weeks. So again, the first event is the beginning to take ESL 41, which is in the past. Right now, it's still true. We're taking ESL 41. And then the second time is going to be next week. Next week will be the second time. And it will continue to be true there. Okay? So bring any questions that you have to class. We will continue to do some practice with this and more explanation. This is a difficult tense. If you're having a hard time with it, that's normal. We're going to keep on working with it until everybody understands. All right, take care. Bye.